Greg DeKine. I'm the product manager for Discovery here at BMC. And up in a little bit, we're going to have Doug Hadley and David Dvorak from Cerner come up and share their story of Discovery. They're going to share how they went about implementing Discovery, what they used the data for, and then start talking about this really cool way that they have combined many data inputs, Discovery being one of the main drivers, into a large system that they call Beacon. So they're going to share all that story with you in just a few minutes. So when we talk about what makes the future of Discovery, especially when I'm looking at the roadmap, I get to spend a lot of time with you customers. We do a lot of studies with, this is an example of some Gartner studies that we use to help decide what we're going to be implementing in our next roadmap. I'd say by far the biggest conversation I have with customers is their journey to the cloud. Haven't found that one customer yet that's wholesale moved everything to the cloud and they're just running wholesale in the cloud, but a lot of hybrid solutions. Okay. I probably said something really intelligent in that 30 seconds. Okay, so in talking about the cloud journey that a lot of our customers are having, they need to understand what the dependencies of those cloud services are. They don't just want to know that there's 10 S3 buckets, 10 EC2 instances. They want to understand how they all work together to make that application in the cloud work. They need that data so that they can empower things such as incident change management. They need that information to keep the operations running. So there's a lot of work that we're doing around making sure that Discovery, as it does in the data center, can discover all your dependencies and assets in the cloud. Another big area is security. Every day there's new security threats coming out. And it's easy for a security team to come to you and say, here's the 1,000 IP addresses that have this vulnerability, go fix it. And as an IT operations team, you need to understand, well, what are those IP addresses? What applications are they supporting? What's the impact of doing this change? Discovery is there to help answer those questions so you can more quickly cover those security threats. When you look at how applications are being built today, they're not a monolithic environment. They're not even staying the same day to day. They're very dynamic. They're changing. Gone are the days of being able to have your pet server named and understanding the lifeline of it. Today it's using containers, virtualization, cloud platforms. You're spinning things up, you're spinning things down. Discovery is there to help you understand what all those environments are and how they're changing. So how does Discovery help with that? So on a monthly basis, we're delivering new content. As we get input from customers on new devices that they're finding, there's a process to get that into our engineers' hands, and maybe in the next month we release it in a TKU. We're making those updates across the whole spectrum, the data center, the networking within the data center, application, and the cloud. That's all coming within that monthly release. Here on the right, you can see an example of a Start Anywhere application, the module within Discovery. So you can start anywhere, and what we mean by that is, say you know that there's a Tomcat instance running on a certain server. You can click into that and start the visualization. It's going to show that that Tomcat server is talking to this database, this load balancer, and you start to piece it all together. You don't have to go into it knowing that these 12 servers make up this application. Really powerful tool to help you understand what an application is, because in the end, the business impact of that application is what everyone outside of IT operations is going to relate to. And then Discovery as a code. When we talk about the continuation of how people are building and delivering apps, it's no longer just building something up, tossing it over the wall, and handing it to the operations team. These modern applications are being built to have a continuous deployment. They're constantly adding new software, fixing bugs, interacting with all the different servers that go with that application, and utilizing the REST API of Discovery. As things change within your pipeline, you're able to interact with Discovery outside of the normal means of a scheduled scan to do a Discovery scan as part of your build process. We actually have a really cool example we did at the Immersion Days, a lab showing that anytime a AWS instance is started or stopped, CloudWatch is watching and is firing off a Lambda function that then is calling Discovery API to go and scan what just changed in the cloud. So being able to keep up with the continuous cloud changes. When we talk about the continuous content that we're delivering, you can kind of see just the breadth of what we're able to discover. This is 16 plus years of the team developing patterns on a monthly basis. Just highlighting some of the new areas that we've been introducing. Hyperconverged infrastructure is a big key component to a lot of modern data centers, as well as software-defined networks. And so we're starting to introduce those, or have introduced those, and expanding upon the vendors that we're able to support today. Another big area, obviously, is the cloud. Again, hearing a lot about organizations going to the cloud, and what does that mean for their discovery? How are they going to discover what's in the cloud based on what they're comfortable with is what they were able to discover in the data center? So I can talk to you all day about how we love to see what you can do with Discovery, but let's bring up a customer that's actually doing it. So I'd like to introduce Doug Hadley and David Dvorak from Cerner to help share their story. Thanks. Hey, David. Thanks for coming.
Well, thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.
That trusted partner is something you're going to see across the whole slide.
Can you hear me? All right, good. All right, well, thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me. Thanks for allowing me to come and talk today. So, a little background on Cerner. So, Cerner was founded in 1979 by three pretty genius, innovative people. So, what they found a market in healthcare. What they wanted to do was advance technology and innovation to save patients throughout the healthcare industry and basically take the pen out of doctors' hands. So 40 years later, we are now at 29,000 associates. Whoops. We're at a $5.4 billion company. So I started with Cerner in 2004. If I can get this right. Started in 2004 as a project manager, and in 2006, I was running a bunch of server provisioning teams, WAN provisioning teams, and one of the stories I want to tell that's probably going to lead into kind of one of the problems that we're trying to solve today is we were building lots of servers. Our footprint, we're a global company. We have $1.2 billion worth of assets across our network. We were exploding. And I was so proud, through innovation, server provisioning, we would be able to keep up with demand. We were innovating and automating server builds. We were automating the way we deploy our WAN stacks. It was awesome. Fast forward through many different roles that I held before, or since then, but in 2016, I was presented with a challenge. Our growth within our assets across the globe, across our company, we weren't able to keep up with it. So we had Discovery implemented on-prem probably in 2013, but when I took over in 2016 with this problem, basically my boss came to me and said, Hadley, we need you to build a reliable inventory of assets, including relationships and attributes necessary to support IT operations. And I went, okay, well, how do we do that? He goes, I don't know, that's what you need to go figure out. So it was very problematic. So the first tool that we looked at, we had tons of different tools across our environment, still do, but we realized that we probably have two dozen different tools around our network, whether they're agent-based or network discovery-based, none of which were, and Dave will probably get a little bit deeper, but none of which were rolled out completely. So I was like, well, there's a problem right there. Because if we don't know where our assets are, we can't secure those assets. You guys know this. We can't manage our licensing costs. We can't manage our software costs. Our mean time to recovery for any incidents is poor. So we had a big challenge ahead of us. So the VP of our software asset management team was basically, you need to go roll out Discovery everywhere, which is a very generic term. Everywhere is big. And what's everything? Is it VDIs? Is it servers? Is it storage arrays? Is it network devices? Is it on-site fax servers? So we have a pretty big environment, a lot of diverse technologies across the the enterprise. We've got iPads on our conference rooms that have IP addresses. Are those included in that? Of course they are. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about our journey on how we implemented discovery and made sure we rolled that out everywhere. We took an approach that you may or may not agree with, but it works for us, and how we took those data sets along with all those other tools that we have in our environment that we don't actually manage, other teams manage, so it was hard to get those rolled out everywhere, but we would take everything we get to join different attributes and different tools to come up with a golden record. And what we did was we built a configuration management system that our Remedy CMDB will also be benefiting from as well, and that's what David's here to talk about. But first, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit through our strategy around our discovery. So we have probably 17 different environments across the globe, whether it's remote hosting, corporate, global, PCI environments. And each environment is managed by different teams. So when I say different teams, say you have a network engineer, you've got a set of network engineers that support the PCI environment. You got a set of network engineers that support the corporate environment. You got, so it was very difficult to get this discovery solution rolled out. It crawls the network. You guys know how it works. It crawls the network. You got to log into devices. Network teams were like, no, you're not touching my network. So what I did is I took a really hard stance with everybody, because I knew what we did is we made this a corporate-wide imperative to get discovery rolled out. Now, if anybody's out there struggling on getting past the technical experts on being able to crawl a network and be able to log into a device and suck out the credentials out of the devices, make it a corporate imperative. Make your CTO go, Hadley's going to get this rolled out and you're going to do it. Make him go to a town hall and say it, and then it's funny how it makes my job a lot easier. But there were still a lot of people out there that are like, no, we're not going to do that. You're not going to crawl my network. And finally, I just had to say, you know what? You're a network engineer. Your job is not to deny me. If you do, you have a policy around it, but your job is to ensure that the network supports what the business needs to support across the network. So that conversation had a tendency to work. Now, I'm still friends with everybody in my company. It wasn't that bad, but so we have 17 different environments, and what we did was the other challenge we had is we have appliances, discovery appliances in every one of those environments. And in 2016, when I went in to talk to our discovery team and looked at all of those inclusion ranges, subnets, and exclusion ranges, and there was also challenges out there around perceived environments that we can't touch. Like, oh my gosh, this is so secretive in here. You can't gather these IP addresses. You can't gather these servers. There was a lot of perceived roadblocks that we had to manage as well. So what we did was we didn't want to have to manage all those inclusion ranges. Cerner owns, we know what class A ranges that Cerner owns. It's IP addresses that they bought that they can use. So what we actually did was we wanted to automate everything. So we created some sweep scanners that would gather an IP address out of that environment, see what was actually alive on the network. That sweep scanner, then we built in code around it that would convert those IP addresses that are active on the network into a CIDR format, /24s, and then those automatically got included in our credential scans. So for those of you who don't know how discovery works, you have to, in your inclusion ranges, you have to plug in the network ranges that you want to discover, and then you've got to put into the Discovery Vault logins to be able to log into those devices and pull out all of the attributes and everything you want to know about that particular device, which is critical. And that was another thing we had to get past, was you're not going to log into my system, but what we did was we found automation in being able to understand how to sweep scan, gather what's active, automate, create our inclusion ranges without human intervention. Because I didn't know what we were scanning, what we weren't scanning. Everybody was manually putting in exclusion ranges, putting in inclusion ranges. It was kind of enough. So we basically wiped it all out, automated it, and that helped a ton. The other thing that we had to do was, once we started rolling this out and once we started knocking down those walls, you have to find a carrot. You have to find a carrot where discovery is going to provide value to the business. And I'll go back to our network engineers as well. So as we started to discover all these environments, we started to store this stuff, and David will talk a little about this a little bit later, but we started pulling all of these data sets together and then solving really business problems for them. So we would go work with the network community and say, okay, do you know where all your network devices are, or how can we help you understand how this redundant pair of equipment, does the configurations match? Can we help you with this? And they were like, well, we have a challenge with that today. So we started picking off these little business value use cases and started, building those carrots for discovery, and that made things easier as well. So we've got, like I said, 17 global devices, sweep scans. We've got teams in the U.S. and teams in Bangalore that are managing these environments. I talked a little bit about this already, but we sweep basically everything. So in every environment, we've actually partnered more closely with our network engineers. And we put those Class A's in the sweep scanners, which is a ton of IP addresses. But what we did is we had them close off that entire environment. So it just rattles through there and discovers that every IP address imaginable, and it only picks out the active IPs. And what we do is, like I said, we automate the inclusion ranges, and then it goes and sucks all of the attributes and details out of those systems into a consolidated database that then gets fed to Remedy and to Beacon. So we've automated that. We've actually, once we started rolling out, then we started measuring, and that was the hard part as well. It's like we needed to ensure that, how do we know what everything is, and how do we know we're capturing everything? So you don't know what you don't know. If you don't see an IP address, how do you know it's there to be able to create your numerator, create your denominator, and create your percentage of rollout? So that's when all of our other sources, this is where actually having a ton of tools in your environment helps, because what we did was take our discovery IP addresses and match those up against IP addresses on every other tool that's active out there, and we essentially created a numerator-denominator type scenario. And so we were able to measure it moving forward on completeness of our rollout, and so I would attend all of our CTOs meetings and senior executive leadership meetings and show them progress, which also helped. And then once we got about 95% done, there were still those corner cases, and that's when the town halls are handy. That's when you can say, hey, Bill, can you pull a plug on discovery and make sure everybody's shaking their head in the right direction for me to be able to discover their environments? And that helped. So we've talked a lot about these bullet points, but then what we did was we took it a bit further on our discovery score, because what happens is there's a lot of, we always got to about 93% discovered. And so my CTO kept going, well, what's the other 7%? So for those of you who are understand how discovery and are familiar with it, there's certain corner cases that discovery can't do. Like, we do not allow discovery to go across our WAN circuits into our client sites where we have on-site servers, so we cut everything off the edge. So there's gaps there. There's appliances that are out of scope for discovery. So that's where it's helpful to have discovery as much as you can get with our discovery tool, and then we use agent-based solutions, what I call element managers, to basically help enhance the data set that we already discover. Does that make sense? So what we did was we created a discovery score. Now this is a little busy, and I don't expect you guys walking out of here understanding everything how this works. But basically the chart on the left is every IP address that ADDM sees. Now it's going to go in and identify an IP address even though it can't discover it or can't log into it because it may be out of scope, like an on-site server or an appliance. But we see an IP address. But we just can't really, if it doesn't deep discover it, it's not going to be fed to Remedy. So what we're battling, okay, well, why isn't this asset in Remedy? Well, because we don't have, you didn't provide us a credential. Or it's out of scope device. It's not going to go to Remedy because we can't discover it. So it goes back to that. We can discover 93% of our environment. We can discover 485,000 IP addresses, but we can't identify what the host name is of that appliance. We just know there's an IP address active on the network. So then I started working with my team, and we said, okay, well, the high-level discovery store is not, the numerator denominator is not enough. We have to add code around what we see in our basic discovery score to exclude out anything that we know we will not scan by discovery. And so what we did is we ended up getting to 96%, But what this allows us to do is we can actually click into each one of those bars and go find those IP addresses that are in scope that we are not discovering, and then go action those. So before, we couldn't really action. There were so many inclusion-exclusion ranges within our discovery solution that we could not action anything, because it could be our fault. I mean, it could be exclusion ranges that we have accidentally in there where we put an inclusion range. It's not going to happen. So this actually allows my team to go action it. So everybody knows, if you can see your assets and be able to identify your assets, there's obvious benefits to this. From a network standpoint, or from a security standpoint, we've got to make sure, that's the new normal for us, is to be able to secure our environment. If we don't know where our assets are, we can't identify what an IP address is, we can't secure it, we can't patch it. We went through, and Dave's going to talk a little bit about WannaCry a little bit, but we could not secure our environment without knowing where our assets are. Service modeling, IT costing was a big deal. We couldn't accurately model out what our license projections, say for Microsoft or for Red Hat or for Oracle. It was a challenge for us to even identify that and understand what our licensing positions are. Effective capacity management practices. So it's important to be able to identify. We have a ton of data centers across the globe. We need to know what our capacity of our ESX boxes or our Citrix environments for our virtual machines. And then how our assets are related. So I talked a little bit about that earlier as well. If you know how your assets or CIs are connected, you know what can impact, you know what the impact is. So if something goes down, you know everything that's connected to it. So that was important. We couldn't do any of that before, and now we can. We talked a little bit about this. I'm not going to kind of go through this, but it was difficult. Discovery is not an easy conversation across the enterprise. Anytime you go and discover a network environment and have to log in devices to get attributes or to get the information from systems, it's a tough conversation. But you've got to provide the value. You've got to identify use cases for the data and execute on those and drive that. And then once people start seeing the value of a discovery solution real time, it's easy for them to buy in. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to David Dvorak, who's going to talk a little bit about, once we started discovering data, what we did with it.
Thank you, Doug. Everybody still hear me okay? If my volume gets too bad, just take your headphones off and throw them at me. Don't want to damage your eardrums. So my name's David Dvorak, and I lead a team of developers that's responsible for our configuration management system, which is called Beacon. Our goal with Beacon is to develop a single source of truth for our asset and configuration data. So Beacon is going to hold that golden source of truth. And we build this upon the reliable foundation that BMC Discovery provides us. Discovery has given us the bulk of the truth within our environment, but like Doug mentioned, a lot of times you don't know what you don't know. How do you know what you haven't discovered? So in addition to using BMC Discovery, we also take advantage of all those tools that are in our environment that do a somewhat similar function, but provide a good check and balance against what Discovery is showing us. We already have things in our environment like McAfee or SCCM, so we might as well suck in that data to Beacon and use that to true up against Discovery and make sure that Discovery is indeed seeing the right things and bringing back the right attributes, the correct operating system, CPU, all those attributes that we need to know to run our business. So we ingest many different sources of data. Beacon is essentially just a data set that lives within Azure Data Lake Store. Sometimes it's hard for people to wrap their head around it because we don't have an app, we don't have a URL, there's not really a user interface, it's just pure data, and data should be enough. You might be thinking that this sounds really similar to Remedy CMDB. Doug mentioned that we view Remedy CMDB as an element manager. So it is a useful source of data for us for some of the attributes that we can't just discover. For instance, within Remedy CMDB, we store attributes like who manages the server, what client it serves, and its primary usage. Those are things that we can't discover in the environment, so we need users to feed that in to the CMDB, and then we will ingest it back into Beacon. And then to close that loop, because Beacon has other sources of data that it pulls from in the environment, like SCCM and McAfee, we can then feed back into the Remedy CMDB and improve the quality of data there by acting as a double check. Sometimes we have difficulty when we do reclaim in our environment. We may take a server off the network, dispose of it, but the CI record and Remedy may still be there. And so that's where Beacon has an opportunity to come in and detect this thing's not on the network anymore, but I see a record for it in Remedy, so I'm going to clear that out because I'm the source of truth, and I know that if that thing's not on the network, it doesn't need to be in Remedy CMDB. Who recognizes what this is? Hands up. Yeah. So this is what somebody who was infected with WannaCry would have seen on their devices. And Cerner took this really personally because in our business, if one of our users has seen this, this is a nurse or this is a doctor who now can't do their job and can't provide patient care because some rando guy wants $300 in lousy Bitcoin. So this really lit a spark on us and encouraged us that we were doing the right thing by building out Beacon. Because Beacon data was used extensively when WannaCry dropped so that we could go out and properly secure our perimeter. So this is one of the things that provided us with our why. Why are we building Beacon? First and foremost, so that we can secure our perimeter. And you can't secure your perimeter until you actually know where it is. And so that's where discovery, along with all the other tools in our environment, helps us to define that perimeter that we can then go and protect. Another compelling reason that we built Beacon was that we had tons of tools within our environment, but none of them were rolled out completely, or some of them were only just scoped for a single environment. Well, we may have SCCM. That's great. We use it to manage our Windows systems and patch them, but it only sees Windows. Or we might have another tool that's only meant to be used in our hosted environment, and the team that's responsible for that, that's all they care about is the hosted environment, which is fine, but we have to solve problems for the entire company and not just that environment. So we need the whole picture, and that's why we got discovery in all of our possible environments so we could then get that complete picture of what our assets are. We also saw that within the different teams that hosted these solutions, there wasn't really a sense of ownership for the data itself. These are incredibly strong teams who first and foremost want to make sure that these solutions are up and running. So if you're managing McAfee, you just want to make sure that it's running and you're deploying it and it's able to keep things up to date. But they're not necessarily looking into the quality of data to see, well, I have a duplicate here because this asset and serial number, it was on this policy server, now it's on this one, and within my data set, I have two of the same thing. Like, that's not good data quality. But I don't expect them to care about that because their role is operational to keep that thing up and running. That's a reason we built Beacon, so that we could have a team that's responsible for that data quality and then look for those deficits and go chase them down and figure out what is the right pieces of data to fit in there. We also have a lot of gaps in our asset management process. I mentioned the example of Reclaim, where you might have a CI record that's still in Remedy and it never gets cleaned up. We also have teams that have access to put servers and assets on the network, but they're not necessarily plugged in to the typical provisioning process, which would include making sure that we get all the necessary agents on it, like McAfee, like SCCM, making sure that we update the CI record and Remedy so it has all the right information. So this is an opportunity for us to come fill those gaps when we know that we might not be getting the accurate picture from our provisioning process. I want to talk about the attributes that people find useful and value within our configuration management system. And to do that, I want to show you a dashboard of our data quality score. This is the method that we use to measure how well we're doing in collecting a complete picture of our asset and configuration data. And The item I want to draw your attention to is the weight number. And it might be a little bit of an eye chart, so I don't expect you to zero in on that. But my point is, when we went out and built Beacon, we went and talked to our potential stakeholders and asked them, what data points are important to you? What business cases or what problems do you want to solve? And what data points would you need to go do that? And then our stakeholders provided us with what ended up being a 200-item list of attributes that were potentially interesting to them. And they provided a scoring or a ranking of what was most important. And from that, we were able to determine this weight. So I know what the most important attributes are to my stakeholders because they told me what is most important. And you can see some of the items are fairly typical. It's IP address, serial number, the host name. You also have interest in CPU count and memory because those are some items that go into software licensing use cases. So it's definitely important to understand core counts and processors if we want to have an accurate financial picture of how we're licensed. So those are the specific attributes that people are interested in with Beacon. More of the qualities that they find useful. First and foremost, they want our data to be accurate, and they want it to be exhaustive. So they want to know everything. They don't want to know just corporate. They want to know all the global data centers, our hosted environments, our secured spheres, our PCI environments. Our data needs to cover everything. Our consumers also like it to be consistent. So if they see one data point in one source system, but Discovery says something else, that's a problem. So we need to make sure that when we build that golden source of truth, that we're unifying that data across the sources that we pull it from. Our consumers like to see things like serial number, IP address, and FQDN. In our environment, that's what defines uniqueness. So you look at those three unique values together, and that generally indicates a unique asset within our environment. Our consumers also like to do use cases with tool comparisons. Again, we have a lot of tools in our environments and a lot of agents on our servers. Teams are interested in what's the coverage. Do I have that agent rolled out everywhere? What are my gaps? What's missing an agent? Is that agent healthy or not? Is it on the latest version? So our data needs to be able to show the presence of various agents and software, the status, and the version of it. And finally, the operating system, cores, and processors. Those are all interesting data points as well for our consumers because that feeds into a lot of important business cases that have cost of ownership implications behind it. So today, the benefits of Beacon have been amazing. In the past, when we've had exercises like responding to WannaCry, there were always doubts about, do we have the right data? Do we see the full picture? But now Beacon data is implicitly trusted. We now have business users and executives that are telling their teams, go use Beacon for your data. Or if we have projects that involve doing something across multiple servers, we're hearing more people encourage their teams, go use Beacon, or did you use Beacon? Do you trust this data? And none of this would have been possible without using BMC Discovery as that foundation to start with, to show us the true landscape of everything that's out there, and then enrich it with the other sources of data that we already have. That's all the content we have. What questions can we answer for you?
Going back there, man.
If you just want to shout it out, I can repeat it, and that's fine. We've had a lot of interesting discussions about mobile devices. We do see those show up in Discovery, but the concern is, do our associates want their personal mobile devices that pop up on our wireless network to show up in our data sets? So that's something, I don't know, Doug, what's your feedback on that one? Because we've been in those discussions, we've heard the concerns, but we haven't quite yet actioned on that to identify those as this is so-and-so's personal device.
Yeah, and can you hear me?
I don't know.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Everybody?
you're good.
So we've made a choice to exclude those at this point. Yeah, we're not doing mobile devices and into our Discovery solution and into Beacon. Oh. Yeah, that's a challenge for us today when, when their IPs change quite frequently when they're on the road. Those are what we can do is when we do discover their IP addresses when they're on our network, and be able to assign, or be able to identify what those devices are. But that's one of those. That's one of our discovery gaps today is when they're on the road and they're connected. It's one of our gaps today that we've got to figure out.
Any more questions? I see one way in the back, yeah. Just want to hand him the mic.
May need a microphone for this one.
How do you today handle VIPs? VIPs with, so you see the IPs in Discovery, but you can't correlate that back to the NetScaler that you're seeing like in the pointer file or the VIP per se. How are you doing that in Discovery, or are you doing that in Beacon, that correlation?
Yeah, so the question was about gaps, and if we see an IP address but we can't correlate it back to a device, how do we handle that? Do I have that right?
Sort of. So when you scan the NetScaler in Discovery, you can actually see a file. You could see like it's a website, right? You could see the website, but when you go back to do an actual Discovery scan, you're seeing the VIP, right? You see an IP, but you can't get access to it because it's not a real device. Does that make sense? How do you correlate those two types of things?
Doug, do we have a lot of those in our environment? I don't recall seeing a lot of NetScalers.
Load balancers.
So in our environment, the load balancing technology we use is Big IP F5. And that is actually a really interesting data set to us because it will show us a lot of information about, we see the actual devices, and then we can see the services, like the virtual services defined on them, and the virtual IP addresses. And when we combine that with looking at the data in the virtual pools, we can trace that all the way back down from here's the VIP on the F5 that we discovered, here's the pool, and here are the servers that live beneath it. Therefore, I know that those servers relate back up to that original. So that's what we can do on F5 with load balancers. I don't have as much exposure to NetScaler, so I'm not certain about that particular item.
Did I kind of answer your question at all? I don't see.
That's the best I can do.
Was it good?
Sorry.
Okay,
That's good.
One in the middle. All right, out there.
Sorry, this question is around your beacon. So are you guys sharing this information? You position it as a single source of truth for the company. Are you sharing this information with your cybersecurity teams?
Yes.
I'm kind of following up on the question that was asked about some mobile devices, obviously, that could be bad actors on the network, and being able to identify whether you own that machine or versus somebody else is using it on your behalf in different locations. I'm just curious how you guys share data between the two of you and whether you've got gaps that exist.
So beacon data it's there for the purpose for the business to consume. So security teams access our data. They have access to our data to be able to pull down and answer questions or execute on a use case that they may have. The way we have architected Beacon is they can pull down raw files. They can pull down CSV files. They can implement a dashboard in Tableau, Power BI, however they want to do to answer their questions. But everybody has access throughout the company to our data, except for federal data, which we do mask unless you're a federally cleared associate. That is masked data, but everybody else has access to that data. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, and we found that our data is vital for our cybersecurity teams. So we partner very closely with them to listen to what use cases they have, how they want to use our data. If we are missing a data point or a data set that they would like to act on, it's very simple for us to prioritize that, go out and do the development work to make that available to them. But they are one of our primary stakeholders, and again, with defining the security perimeter, having a robust and well-informed configuration management system is vital.
And one thing I do want to touch on a little bit more is the difference between Beacon and the Remedy CMDB. So the Remedy CMDB we leverage for service management. So what we capture on our network doesn't necessarily need to be put into Beacon today. So we capture every IP address, every asset that we can, and store it in Beacon. We want people pulling data out of Beacon and not necessarily out of the CMDB. There will be data within the CMDB that they'll perform incident change, problem management against. Our discovery solution does feed Remedy CMDB still directly, but what we will be doing here in the near future is going to be enhancing the Remedy CMDB to where once Discovery feeds the Remedy CMDB, we will be enhancing that data through a Beacon connection. So if for some reason Discovery did not discover a particular device because it didn't have a credential, but we see that device within Beacon through some other element manager or some other source, it will update Remedy CMDB directly. So it allows us to have a more robust, more accurate picture within our Remedy CMDB, which has been a problem for us in the past as well. So it solved a good business case there too. Yes, sir. Ma'am.
Hi, this is a real-time challenge in our organization. So what happens is like ACI is discovered and it's synced to CMDB, but during the course sometime we lose access to the access to that server, and all the enriched attributes, everything will be lost. CI will be destroyed by ADDM. Do you see this access failure in your environment? If so, how you are handling that?
So let me make sure I understand. So you'll discover a device, and it gets loaded into the CMDB, but then it won't discover it again, and then it deletes it out of the CMDB, even though it's still on the network?
For some reason, we may lose access to that server. The Discovery loses access to the server. So Discovery has an aging process. Like in 7 consecutive scan, if we didn't get it, it will delete the CI. So we will lose all the manually added information because CI gets into delete status in Remedy CMDB. So you see these kinds of issues. It's a real-time scenario for us every day.
Yeah, so there is an aging process within Discovery, so it's like 7 days. If it doesn't see it for a consecutive amount of days, it will delete it out of Remedy, and so everything you've assigned managed by, used by, all those manual fields in Remedy goes away. So that will happen. I don't know that there's a way around that, but we would store that historical data within Beacon to be able to go back historically and see what it was. So we do that. So we do store that historic data within within Beacon, our configuration management system. So you could access that and see what it was set at before. So when Discovery does discover that server again or whatever that device is and feeds it back into the CMDB, you'd be able to update those fields accordingly. Mm-hmm.
All right, we might have time for like one quick question. Don't want to hold you too much. I'm sure there's some yummy snacks out there to get to.
You're right here, so thought of question. The extension of the question, are we storing this data in CMDB or the data stored into your beacon? So this is first question. And second question, when I talk about CMDB, it's just not a CI and relationship. It's beyond that. It's ownership. How do you guys handle the ownership? When you discover the data, Discovery doesn't talk about ownership. How do you handle it?
I'll answer your first question. So it was the same. Like when Discovery runs, it'll feed data directly into Remedy CMDB. Okay, so it'll also feed data into our into Beacon. So the data sets should match. The only difference between Beacon is we're also ingesting multiple data sources outside of Discovery, whether it's Altiris, OCI, SCCM, etc. And so if Discovery does not see a particular device, but we see it within another element manager, we'll identify it as a record in Beacon. And then future state will be able to feed that data, the additional records that's not fed directly into Remedy CMDB from Beacon into Remedy. So we're clearing up our data sets. Now from an ownership standpoint, that is a manual process today. Yeah, so that's one of our challenges across our environment. So as we discover devices, we rely on our production teams that are responsible for those devices to go into Remedy and to make sure that used by, managed by, all of those manual fields within Remedy are updated. And it's a challenge. I mean, we've got a lot of assets, and you know, they have performance KPIs that they get measured on to ensure that that data is updated. But it's a challenge, and it's probably brought up in a conversation probably at least once every couple weeks. Whenever we have some big event where we have to go mitigate something, and they we're doing a Red Hat to Oracle migration, right? So then they're trying to fast track those, and there's a subset of servers that nobody knows who they are. And so what we do is we built the policy around those, and so we have a software asset management team that's only responsible for ensuring that there's ownership for those devices. It's tough, but what they do is they'll send out these flashes and say, okay, there's X amount of servers that don't have managed bys. You've got until this day, otherwise we're shutting them off the network. So there's threats in that regard. But that's what it's come down to. I mean, if you can't identify an asset and you don't know who's going to be able to patch it, and it's just sitting there running, you're going to have to shut it down at some point if nobody claims it. So that's kind of how we treat that.
Thanks, Doug. I just want to thank Doug and David one more time. I know we're at time, so thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, feel free to come find us. Thank you.